resuming the recording. Let me just start again because my brain is fried. I'm sorry, you guys.
No worries, do over.
My name is Michelle Brownstein. I'm the Associate Director of User Experience at 352 here in Gainesville. Today, we're talking to Matthew Doty, and I'm very pleased to have him come and talk about his work that he's been doing and the varied adventures that he's had in different types of work. So excited for that. Before I hand it over to him, I wanted to let everybody know that for those of you in the Gainesville area, because I think we may have some that are joining from outside of the Gainesville area, we are looking to determine if there's still interest in the UX certification course through Nielsen Norman Group. So as many of you guys know, we were looking to run that actually this month in person, and COVID kind of put a kibosh on those plans. So if you guys are interested, keep an eye out on the Connect GNV Nielsen Norman Group UX certification Slack channel. I'll be dropping a link in there for a form to just fill out if you're interested in participating next year. We will be doing it remotely. We're trying to determine if the cost would still be the same because it would be done remotely. We're hoping that we can talk Nielsen Norman Group down on price a little bit, but that is yet to be seen. So keep an eye out for that. I'll make sure to announce it in our subsequent UX meetup groups to give you guys an update on any of that. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, mbrownstein@352.com, or you can hit me up on that GNV Connect Slack. So with that said, Matthew, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay. Well, I just saw somebody join, and then there they are. I have a former colleague of mine that just joined. Hello, Renee. How are you? Anyway.
She wasn't listening yet.
So yeah, we're gonna go ahead and get started. First, I want to do. Hi, Renee. Renee's a fellow Minnesotan. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen, and we're gonna see. Let's see here. I'm also going to try something fancy. Can everybody see the amazing scape here of whatever's going on here?
You sure can.
Yep. Awesome. Cool. I'm going to hide all of you so I don't get distracted. So also, Michelle, if any questions come through or whatever, I'm going to be kind of pausing at the end of every section and kind of seeing if there's any questions or a commentary. Sure. If that's cool with you.
Yeah, that absolutely works. If you guys want to drop questions into the chat, we can kind of go through at the end. Just maybe prefix your question with Matthew, and then we can make sure that we hit all of those. And I would ask that everybody go on mute, which looks like everybody's done. So thank you so much. And yeah, we should be good.
Awesome. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to set the stage here. We're going to start with some introductions. I'm going to try something fancy at the end. I have a video that I'm showing, and there's a setting in Zoom that allows me to pump the video's audio through to each of you. But I've noticed in the past that there's some inconsistencies on volume. So if it's too loud, go ahead and feel free to turn it down during the video. Too soft, turn it up, and we'll see what we can do. This is my Bitmoji. You can decide for yourself whether or not it's accurate. But I do want to just spend a little bit of time talking about me and then do a shameless plug for what I'm up to. But it's actually a pretty good setup for what we're going to talk about. So long story short, I've been a lot of different places, and I've been called a bunch of different names. And so what I've learned, though, over the last decade plus is that people simply prefer good experiences with products, services, and technology. And coupled with that, companies, teams, and organizations that deliver good experiences, these good experiences save money, save time, increase their revenue, and develop a happy, loyal, and vocal customer base. And so one of the questions that I'm often faced with is, well, how do we as a company or an organization actually get to the point of designing and delivering really, really good experiences? And really what it boils down to is we have to get really good at intentionally designing experiences. And in other words, I guess in other words, what that means is we have to get good at something called experience design. And I apologize for the potential seizures this slide may cause. So when we talk about experience design, really briefly, what I'm referring to is an empathy-driven philosophy and a rigorous discipline that put the people that we're designing for at the center of attention of everything that we do. So in recent years, because of the benefits of taking a human-centered approach and being intentional about designing experiences, experience design in all of its forms has, the demand for experience design in all of its forms has exploded. And as a result of that, something that I've noticed is that you have kind of a couple of different situations colliding. One, you have very relatively few people who actually do this, who actually go and intentionally design experiences. And then on the flip side of that, you have organizations who really struggle to know what it takes to enable and sustain the practice of experience design, even though they believe in it, they want it, they want the benefits. And so with these things in mind, I've seen people, teams, and organizations be at very drastically different points on their journey toward better experience design. And that's kind of, here comes the shameless plug part. That's kind of why I launched my company back in February. It's called XDGO. And the whole point of what I do with my life now is to help organizations, teams, and individuals understand and embrace and get really good at being intentional about designing experiences. And that's about as deep as I'll go there, because again, it's how does an organization, how does a team, or even how does an individual get really good at this stuff? There's kind of a lot of different paths that people can take. But what I want to talk about tonight is when you find yourself in an organization, or if you either as kind of a lone voice crying in the wilderness, trying to kind of beat the drum of taking a more human-centered approach, or if you're a team or you've been hired to build a new capability, how do you actually get an organization or a team to understand and embrace and sustain this stuff? And so really what kind of brought me to the framework that I'm going to be talking to you about tonight is about 10 years ago, I was working for an organization, and I was specifically brought in to build a new experience design capability. And, with that comes, that path when you're trying to establish something new is often fraught with peril. And I found myself kind of laying in bed at night, and one night after a particularly perilous week, and just wondering, how can this be better? In other words, how can I help the organization and the team the organization that I work for, and the team that I'm working with, and the other teams within the organization, become more aware of what experience design is and what it can actually do? And then once we have that awareness, how do we get really good, and how do I convince people that we need to invest repeatedly in making sure that we're really well grounded in the basics of what it takes to both do experience design as well as sustain and kind of nurture the practice and a human-centered culture. And then finally, once we have well, not finally, but next, once we have all of this kind of ready to go, how do we go about making the change necessary to kind of realize the benefits of human-centered design? And then once we've made those changes, what do we need to do to exercise the discipline necessary to kind of make sure that the changes stick? And so that's out of those late night musings, this is where the whole concept of ABCD XD was born. And what I'd like to do is actually go into each of these, go into what I mean by awareness, by the basics, talk about how to influence change, and then how do you then make that change stick through discipline. But before I start jumping into all of that, I'd love to pause and just see if I've lost anybody, or if there are like any burning questions that must be answered now before we dive into each of these things. I'm going to try to do the good speaker thing and count to 10 in my head. Okay, awesome. So what I'm going to go ahead and do then is I'm going to jump through each of these. And again, I'll stop at the end of these and see if there are any discussions, burning questions, commentary, anything that we want to pause and talk about more. So when I talk about awareness, really, I like to ground us in what I actually mean. And often what I like to do is use a quote from a really trusted source. So tipping my hand at my age and the popular culture that I grew up in, this quote from this really reliable source, knowing something is really half the battle. So knowing something's half the battle, and the other half of the battle is, according to this diagram, red lasers and blue lasers. So what do we need to know? First, we need to know what experience design is. And so the way that I like to explain it is, first, it's really about intentional actions taken to increase the quality of the interactions that people have with products, services, technology, brands, etc. This is a definition that usually helps either the clients or the partners or the people that I'm working with kind of wrap their heads around it. Second, I like to describe it as a professional discipline rooted in the principles and techniques of human-centered design. So that leads us to, well, okay, what do we mean by human-centered design? So like I said in the beginning, it's this empathy-driven philosophy and a rigorous discipline that puts the people we're designing for at the center of attention as we create products, services, and technology. So the second thing that I think we need to know or be aware of is, how do you explain this to other people? So I framed this up in a couple of ways. So if you want to, as I've engaged in efforts to try to raise awareness of what experience design is all about, these are some talking points that I've used. So first of all, experience design is all about understanding, empathizing with, and advocating for the people that we're designing for. Another thing that experience design is all about is, once we understand and can advocate for what the people we're designing for want, need, and expect, there's also another at least half of it that's about balancing competing objectives, whether those objectives be business, technical, brand, if you're dealing with something physical, space constraints. So it's, yes, understanding and advocating for the user, but also being really cognizant of the other competing forces. And then second, and then here, once we understand what all those competing forces are, we can actually do this next thing, which is all about building on shared objectives. So finding allies that you can help achieve their goals and demonstrate how experience design helps them achieve their objectives, because it's very similar to yours. Third, we need to know what experience design can really do. And so one of the things that helps me when I'm in a situation of trying to figure out how can I move the needle and help the organization or team that I'm working with become more human-centered, I like to kind of run through a list of things that typically people experience pain with. So when done well, experience design can reduce the time it takes to get products, services, and technology to market. So if the people that we're working for really are experiencing a lot of pain in this area, we can make the case that investing in more of a human-centered approach will help them achieve that. Another thing that XD can actually do is reduce the overall cost of producing products, services, and technology. Now, one of the difficult things about taking a human-centered approach is often it requires a little bit more of an upfront investment than is typical. And so human nature makes choosing to invest in that a little difficult. And that's just something that we as experienced designers have to be cognizant of and try to work with. Next, when done well, experience design can lead to a strong base of people who really love your product or your service or your technology. And then finally, well, actually not finally, there's one more that's a little controversial. When done well, experience design can actually increase productivity, make people do things better, faster, smarter, increase revenue. And then finally, when done well, experience design can save lives. One of the interesting things that I've had the opportunity to do over the course of my career is engage in projects for clients where really the decisions being made with technology and services and products make the difference between someone living or dying. And that's, I think when it comes down to that, those types of experiences really are fulfilling to design. But also it kind of makes one pause and step back and say, whoa, wow, design can actually be a really meaningful thing. So that, before we move on to basics, I want to pause. Normally when I do this presentation live, there's lots of opportunity to engage with you as an audience and ask questions and, kind of, have more of a dialogue. But I do want to, I know on the Zoom meeting, it's a little more difficult. Before we dive into the B for basics, I'd love to know if anybody has any questions, thoughts, comments, or should I just keep rolling?
Just a thought that
Yeah.
I know for me, one of the most satisfying things in my work, I work at effectively an agency, so we work on a number of different types of products, but the ones that I find the most value and interest in are certainly the ones where we're making a real impact on people's lives. And between research and design, we have this amazing opportunity to make a positive impact and really be the advocate for our users to make sure that our products are improving their lives. Jared Spool goes on and on about, you shouldn't be building anything that doesn't, improve someone's life. And I think that as designers and design-minded people, I think, this is a great opportunity for us to really focus in on that, particularly with everything going on in the world right now, to really make sure that whatever we're doing is to the greater benefit of the world and the people that we work with.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'll get off my
soapbox. Who else? I like your soapbox. I agree with that soapbox. Any other thoughts, questions, burning conversations that must happen before we go on? Okay. Well, let's go ahead and go into the basics. Yes, B is for basics, and I think sometimes as kind of visionaries, we as designers often kind of look at the basics as being boring. Another B word. But one of the interesting things that I've discovered is actually a principle taught by this guy. So up in Minneapolis, mentioning the former coach of the Green Bay Packers is. So Minneapolis is where I'm from. Mentioning Vince Lombardi or mentioning the Green Bay Packers is often a cue for ridicule or boos or jeers. But there's a really interesting principle that his coaching style taught. So his quote, "Gentlemen, this is a football." During his tenure as the coach for the Green Bay Packers, his philosophy was to begin every training season by walking his team rigorously through several exercises that really grounded them, and some might argue over-grounded them in the basics of the game of football. But his philosophy was that if his team did not take the basics for granted, and they really made sure that they had a mastery of the basics of the game, they would play a better game. And his philosophy ended up being dead on. During his tenure, he led the Packers to a lot of success. And so those of you who know me know that I'm not much into sports. So for me to call on the world of sports in this context means that there's something juicy there, at least from my perspective. So if really grounding ourselves in the basics is a good idea, what are the basics of experience design? I framed this up in a couple of three ways. First, kind of going back to this scale, at its very root, experience design has two main objectives. These objectives are actually really simple to understand, but they're not super easy to implement. And I'll show you what they are, and you'll probably agree with me. So first, like we said before, objective one is to understand, empathize with, and advocate for the people we are designing for. So they as experienced designers. But then on the flip side, we have to, as our second goal, design experiences that balance the human needs against the business objectives, the technical and operational considerations. What narrative is the creative or marketing trying to bring into the world, and how does the brand want to show up, and how should the brand show up through this interaction? And as experienced designers, at a bare minimum, we can't ignore or escape all of the other contextual forces at play in the experiences we design, even though the decisions we own in terms of designing experiences are relatively few. Those decisions can and should have an influence in all of these areas. The second basic I want to talk about is the basic activities of experienced designers. And this is, in the past when I've talked about this, this has sometimes been controversial, but the basic activities of experienced designers are actually fairly broad in nature, and I'll dive into these. So one, the basic activity, I kind of lump these into three areas. So one is design research. This is really anything that we do to observe people, understand their needs, wants, and expectations. Oh, that's interesting how that resolved. That's kind of trippy. I like that. Anyway, so design research is either about observing to understand or engaging to validate decisions that we've made. The second bucket is what I call experience strategy. This is really about taking everything that we've learned about our audience, their context, the competitive landscape, and synthesizing and distilling those facts into meaningful stories and actionable recommendations. So it's really about kind of trying to make the whole greater than the sum of the parts, meaning trying to bring insights that otherwise kind of sit separately and bring them together in meaningful ways and telling a compelling story that inspires action. And then third and finally, is an area that I call, that I refer to as experience modeling. So this is about envisioning and modeling the experiences that resonate with the people that we're designing for, and then inspire project sponsors, leaders, and teams to unite under a common vision. So, and then bringing that vision to life through more detailed design and implementation activities. The next thing I'd like to talk about is when someone is trying to build a team or hire someone who does experience design. In those situations, when you hire or when one hires experienced design talent, they want to look for someone who thinks with both sides of their brain. In other words, what they want to do is they want to find someone who can balance art with analysis, passion with pragmatism, and dreams with details. I worked really hard on this alliteration, so I hope you enjoy that. As I walked through that, you're probably thinking, wow, this is kind of a rare individual. This gets us back to something I said earlier. One of the two phenomenon that I've noticed is that there are really very few people who do this. And it's not that someone can't be trained to think this way, but there are very few people who kind of naturally show up like this. And then when it comes to, this is more advice for an organization that's trying to build and nurture either a team, a capability, or a culture. In order to be successful with that, there are kind of four basic needs that I've identified that experienced designers need to be successful. First is access to people or data. And Michelle, you mentioned earlier soapbox time. So I'm going to get on my soapbox about four things. But the first soapbox is this line here, that you cannot say that you're human-centered unless you have regular and direct access to the humans you're designing for and data they are generating. So in other words, I was actually talking to a former colleague of mine recently, and he said, yeah, you can't do human-centered design without humans. And I thought that was a really apt way of putting it. So the first basic need is we need access to people and data. The second basic need is this idea of sustained focus. So experience design is an iterative thinking profession. It's not uncommon for experience designers to spend hours or even days in their efforts to solve seemingly small but significant problems. So a story that I like to tell about this is I was working for an agency in Chicago back in 2008, and I can't remember what I was working on, but I had gotten up to go to the restroom or go to the break room to get a drink, and I walked past my friend Jeff, and he was sitting at his desk, and he was just sitting there, hands off the keyboard, and just staring at his screen. And he was prototyping something, but he was just staring at his screen. And so I went to the break room, and I did whatever, or the bathroom or whatever. And I did whatever I did. And then I came back, and he was still in that same spot. He was just still sitting there staring at his screen. And I walked up to him and I said, Jeff, you know, people who don't understand what we do and how we do it would think you are just wasting time right now. And I love that story because it's such an example of how so often when we're trying to solve problems as experienced designers, how much just has to go on inside of our heads before we can even put our fingers back on the keyboard or the mouse or the trackpad or whatever. So that's why sustained focus comes into play here. Another basic need that I call out here is collaborative relationships. So the work of experience design cannot be done effectively in a vacuum. Experienced design professionals need regular access to project sponsors, leaders, and teams. So this is kind of the flip side of access to people and data. This is us getting really clear about what all of the different people who have skin in whatever game we're playing, understanding their perspectives so that we can then demonstrate how what we do will help them achieve their goals. And then the fourth basic need, anybody who's been at this for a while will probably be rolling their eyes and being like, oh, but it's this idea of having a seat at the table. So as experience design professionals, we need to have a voice in decisions that impact our work. I've seen too many well-intentioned project sponsors, leaders, and teams operate on their own assumptions of what we do and need to be successful. This needs to be actively checked and avoided. And I'm doing my best not to mince words, but also not sounding like a jerk. So hopefully I achieved that. And hopefully understanding kind of these basic needs and seeing them framed up like this will help you kind of have whatever conversations you need to have in your own circles of influence. And that's the end of the basics. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pause and see if I've ruffled any feathers, because it only gets better from here. It only gets more controversial. Does anybody have anything that they want to add, ask, discuss?
I'm not an expert in the alphabet, but I'm pretty sure C is for cookie.
You know, it is, and it's good enough for me.
Matthew, are you willing to share this deck after it's all?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I appreciate that, because
yeah,
you know, it's one of those cases where you could talk to your stakeholders until you're blue in the face, but then when
Yes.
you're able to pull in other resources that support what you've been saying for, I don't know, maybe call it 12 months or so.
Yeah. Oh man. Yes, yeah. This will be up. This should be up in like 24 hours.
I was hired to do more data-driven design. And I'm like, okay, well, I've got the data, I do the designs, and I don't get a lot of implementation. You know? So the more data I can provide, the happier I'll be.
I have no idea what you're talking about. I've never been in that situation.
Right. I've heard it's completely unique to me. Nobody else has ever been in that.
Right, exactly. I think it's just you. Oh, that's awesome. Anything else? Any other thoughts, commentary, concerns, criticisms, jokes? All right. Well, let's jump into the sticky topic of change. Let the feather ruffling begin. So, again, tipping my hand at my entertainment proclivities and the decades in which I grew up. If anybody's a fan of Frank Herbert's Dune or the movie, the David Lynch film from the 80s, this is a screenshot from that film. But I love this quote. Kind of the background here is this leader, this Duke, is actually going to go take over a planet or going to take stewardship over a planet, which is kind of what the story centers around. And he's talking to his son before they make this massive change and move from their planet and then go to this planet called Dune. He's talking to his son and giving him some advice about the importance of change in our lives. And he says, without change, something sleeps inside us and seldom awakens. And then he turns to his son in a very, very serious way and says, the sleeper must awaken. And that becomes a theme. And I think that's true for all of our lives. Change is uncomfortable, change is scary, change is new. Yet at the same time, without change, something sleeps inside us and seldom awakens unless we embrace change. So with that in mind, I want to share, I just want to get really real here and be very honest and transparent and say that change is hard. And I think if I were to augment this and be a little bit more honest with it, it would read like this: change is really, really hard. And if you have ever tried to change something significant in your own life, or try to be a catalyst for change for either someone else or a team or an organization, you get this. Again, 80s film reference, anybody who says differently is selling something. So I just want to be very clear that what I'm recommending here, what I'm about to recommend in the subsequent slides, I don't pretend is easy. Many of the concepts and principles are simple, but that you're going to see later on, we're actually going to have a whole conversation about simple does not mean easy. So, so I want to walk through three, for lack of a better term, what I call keys to effective change. The first is to identify what you want to change. Now, this may sound stupid. This may be like, and of course, Matthew, why are you even talking about this? Duh. Why, yes, we have to identify what we want to change. But I've been around the block long enough to understand that so many change efforts fail because either people are not clear about what's changing, or the people who own decisions don't agree on what's changing, and we're trying to move forward anyway. So that's why I put this first. The second is to pinpoint what I call critical behaviors. And in other words, what is actually going to get us from where we are now to where we want to be? And then finally, you have to experience those critical behaviors. This is where all of the theory and planning has to become real. You actually have to do something about it. And we're going to step into these three things each separately. So the first one is identify what you want to change. So in the context of experience design and helping either yourself, your team, or your organization understand and embrace this stuff and get really, really good at it, there's actually a lot of common changes that I've seen over the years that people or teams want to make. So the first one is, quite simply learning more about experience design. So like we talked about before, becoming more aware. Maybe that's a change that we want to make. Or learning how to do a specific experience design technique. So, hey, I've heard of card sorting, but I've never done it. I want to change, and I want to learn how to do it, and I'm going to start doing it. Other people might be in the situation where they're trying to hire experience design talent, and that is a significant change. Implementing human-centered thinking, changing your culture or process to become more human-centered, establishing an experience design practice, team, or department, or maturing existing teams experience design capabilities. And so I just give these as examples of when we talk about change in this context, this is really what I'm thinking of. How do you go about making this kind of change happen? The second, whatever it is, whatever you've identified as your change, you really have to get good about identifying what I call critical behaviors. And what I mean by these is one, critical behaviors are more often than not small, and they're also very, very simple. But as we'll learn here in just a bit, simple, again, does not always equal easy. In fact, simple rarely equals easy when you're actually trying to affect change. Critical behaviors are also what I would consider high impact, meaning for the level of effort that you put in, the outcome is often exponential if you do them right. And then finally, the critical behaviors actually result in what you wanted. And the reason I use a little acorn here to visualize this is acorns start very, very small, but given the right care and feeding, they become huge. And so an acorn is kind of an example. I like that metaphor of something small eventually becoming something major and immovable. So I've been saying this a couple times. I'm going to walk through a couple of examples of what I mean by this. So in the context of critical behaviors, this idea of simple doesn't mean easy is illustrated by three things. So first, I like to think of, I like to help us wrap our heads around this idea of what a critical behavior is by starting with something very, very, very understandable. So this is a picture of a seesaw, or a diagram of a seesaw, and the critical behaviors to get the person on the left to go down and the person on the right to go up are varied. There are lots of different things you can do that would be small, simple, and yield the desired result. So the person on one example of a critical behavior is the person on the left could lean all the way back, and then it might shift the weight, shift the distribution. The person on the right could get off, and that would bring the person down on the left, but then the person on the right wouldn't be up. So you'd be partway there. So there's lots of different critical things that we could do to make that happen. So those are examples of critical behaviors in that context. Moving to a little bit more of a complex scenario, I bring this up because I like to show up and be my authentic self and be vulnerable. I am one who frequents the scale and understand the critical behaviors needed to obtain and maintain a healthy weight and BMI. But for me, it's not always easy to engage in those critical behaviors. And so what am I talking about here? So the critical behaviors are watching what I eat, making sure I'm eating well, and getting enough exercise, and creating, if I want to lose weight, creating the sufficient calorie deficit for a sustained period of time, while also trying to build muscle. Now that is very easy for me to understand, but I really don't like doing any of that. So it's very, very hard. It's not easy for me. And then finally, there are some critical behaviors to maintaining a healthy relationship with your partner. Anybody who's in a relationship of any kind probably can rattle off several key behaviors or several critical behaviors to having a good relationship with your partner. But again, often like the second example, it's not always easy to engage and maintain engagement in those behaviors. One of I gave this talk a couple of years ago at a conference, and I usually ask, like, what are the critical behaviors in these areas? And I get audience participation. And when I got to the point of, hey, what are the critical behaviors to having a good relationship with your partner? And somebody said, alcohol. That was fun. Anyway, good laugh, but you guys get it. for example, now, so we've talked about critical behaviors, and we've talked about examples of critical behaviors. But what I want to do is I want to walk through a list of critical behaviors for one of the goals that I listed earlier. So let's say you're in a situation where you're trying to establish an XD practice. Oh, nice typo, Matthew. It should say "an." So if you're trying to establish an XD practice, here are several critical behaviors that will help you do that. So one, you need to make sure that you're experiencing your audience. This goes back to that first basic need. You have to, if you're going to become human-centered, you have to experience your audience, meaning you have to observe them, you have to interact with them, you have to talk to them, you have to see what they do, you have to listen to what they say they do, and then you have to observe what they actually do. So again, it's this idea of really doing what you need to do to experience your audience through primary or secondary research or analyzing data. The second critical behavior for establishing an XD practice is to make your thinking tangible. Meaning, in other words, when you learn really cool stuff about the people that you're designing for, put that up somewhere, make it appealing, engage people with it. The story that I like to tell with this one is, again, about 10 years ago when I was working with this company, where kind of the whole ABCD UX model cropped up in my head. I was actually sitting at my desk and I was building a persona. And as I was working in my cube, somebody from the development team who sat like 2 floors below us, and don't get me started on that. Like, I'm a huge believer in co-location, and there's all kinds of issues with that. But anyway, they sat 2 floors below us, and they were coming up to chat with me because, you know, that's how we did. We worked together. And they walked up, and the first thing they said as I was working on this sketch of a persona is they were able to quickly look at all the different elements of it. Like, what kind of brands does this person engage with? Who are they? You know, what are they into? The first thing he said to me was, "Oh, I know somebody like that." And I was like, "Score! Yes, that mission accomplished." And so it's these little things that you have to persistently do to help kind of raise awareness, as well as wrap your head around who your audiences are. The third critical behavior is to take a collaborative stance. It's really easy for us as designers to kind of get caught in the us versus them trap. And I think, and while that's kind of just, that is our primary go-to as human beings. We're competitive. We like to protect our own. But when we take a collaborative stance, when we actively and intentionally look for opportunities to build bridges, partnerships, alliances, we actually find that by doing so helps us get to where we want to be faster. In other words, one great way to do this is to really understand who you're working with. And I think I've mentioned this a couple of times. Really understand who you're working with, understand what's driving them, understand what's giving them pain, and then figure out some way that you can show how experience design can help soothe their pain. A phrase that I often use is "go be someone's morphine," and so that's a way to kind of get this whole thing of experience design established. And then this final one is I call it practicing tactful persistence. I actually wrote on my blog a short post about this, but the idea here is that it's very similar to the collaborative stance, meaning it's easy for us to feel super righteous and justified in thinking that we know the right way to do things. And I'm not going to say that that's not true, but like Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibilities. And one of our responsibilities in kind of having a vision for how things should go from a user-centered perspective is to understand where the people that we're working with are, meet them where they are, and then meet that and then be ready when they're ready to be ready for them when they're ready to kind of actually make some progress. So another way that tactful persistence shows up is taking every single opportunity you can to just gently and persistently move the needle on experience design in your organization. So a great example of that is I once, when I was consulting for this same agency in Chicago, we were doing some contextual usability testing for a concept that we had created. So we were going out to this client's customers and trying to figure out if what we're concepting works. Well, I was able to convince the client to have the executive sponsor from their side come along with me and be my observer. And within, that was a very small, tactfully persistent thing to do. But as soon as that happened, it exploded and he was convinced. So, and then that allowed the project to shift and invest even more in experience design. So finally, we have to, this last one, I always have a hard time with the way this is phrased, but I can't think of a way to phrase this better. And maybe at the end of it, someone can give me a better idea. But this third is all about experiencing the critical behaviors. So once you've identified what you want to change, and you're pretty clear about how you get from point A to point B, you actually have to start experiencing how it feels and what the results are from actually doing things differently. So one of my favorite quotes is from Will Rogers, kind of an interesting fellow. He says there are three kinds of people: the one that learns by reading, the few who learn by observation, and the rest of us have to pee on the electric fence for ourselves. I am going to raise my hand and say that I vacillate between being a fence peer and an observer, but I totally get this quote. And really, there's actually a lot of science behind this notion that the first best way to affect change in yourself or in someone else is to give them direct experience with whatever it is that you're trying to get them to change, so that they can then experience the benefits, the outcomes of behaving differently. The second best way, besides direct experience, is something called vicarious experience. Now, I'm going to show, this is a soundless clip. Oops, sorry. I'm going to show a soundless clip here, but this is a clip of, if you remember from your Psych 101 days, this was a really, really groundbreaking experiment. They were trying to understand the mentality of Nazi soldiers in Germany, and they were trying to figure out why people would behave in ways that that they otherwise wouldn't. Well, it turns out a lot of it has to do with this vicarious experience, which is basically when we observe someone doing something, we're more likely to do the same thing. So in this case, children were shown a video of isn't she sweet? Oh my goodness. Children were shown a video of a grown-up basically beating the crap out of this Bobo doll. And then there were two groups. Some children saw the video, some children didn't. And then they were introduced into this room full of toys. And then the children who had seen the adult beating the crap out of the Bobo doll were significantly more likely to exhibit those same behaviors because they had seen those modeled, and they had learned through vicarious experience that they wouldn't get into any kind of trouble if they did so. And there's a lot of variations of this experiment, but it time and time again it holds true. Again, when we see someone doing something, we're more likely to do the same thing, especially if that person is like us and they get rewarded. So how can we use this to our advantage? There are lots of different ways to do so, but the idea here is to, if someone that you're trying to get to do things differently won't budge and engage in the behaviors, the next best thing that you can go to is to find examples of maybe one of their peers or someone they admire, or someone else in the industry who's doing this stuff, and demonstrate through that the benefits that this person might enjoy. as we talk about change, one of the things that I think is really, really important, and kind of wrapping up this section on change, one of the things I think is really important is to recognize the power of these two questions. If we're trying to change anything in ourselves, or if we're trying to influence change either in our team or our organization, we have to, the answer to both of these questions has to be yes. And in order for us to even begin changing, and this is super, super simple, but it's a really helpful tool that I found when I'm trying to figure out, okay, things aren't going well. We know we need to change. We're trying to change, but which question is the answer no at this point, either for myself, for my team, or for the organization that I'm trying to influence? And the answers to these simple questions really are a great place to start in terms of where you need to focus your effort and try to get that answer switched to a yes. So before we jump into discipline, I'm going to pause. And I said a lot of potentially controversial things there. So I'm very curious to see if anybody has any thoughts or questions. Or did I just put everybody to sleep?
No, it's great. It's great. Keep it coming. Keep it coming. I thought the tactful persistence was really interesting because this is something that I've seen time and time again on projects, particularly, longer engagement projects where, we're doing a lot of research and we keep hearing the same thing over and over again, but it takes a lot of presentation of that information to stakeholders to be like, no, really, people don't understand this thing, and finding tactful ways to bring that up until it finally goes through. Because what I have found is that it takes probably 6 to 7 times of introducing that idea of that issue before it can get through to certain stakeholders. And that's a hard curve. I mean, especially when you're trying to make progress on something quickly, but having persistence, I think that was really on point for what I've been experiencing recently.
Yeah, I think it's, my parents actually like to tell a story about me when I was a really little kid. I think I was like 3 or 4, and they took me to some fireworks thing. And apparently I really wanted to get some treats or something. And I mean, I certainly don't feel this way now, but they were saying that I did so repeatedly, but every time I did it, I wasn't a jerk about it. I wasn't like, I was just like, well, what about this angle? And 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 finally they were like, no. And then at the very end of it, apparently I said something like, well, maybe next year we'll get some treats. And I always like to think about that story when I think about tactful persistence, but we essentially are trying to do the same thing. It's like, okay, what is the best way for me to try to help someone understand? And more often than not, I'll actually go back to something that I said earlier. More often than not, unless someone's actually experiencing pain or they're being significantly hedged up in what they're trying to do or what their objectives are, it's hard to move the needle. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't keep trying to persist, keep demonstrating, and doing so in that way of meeting them where they are, and then being there for them when they're ready. Any other thoughts or questions about change or critical behaviors, or can I do it? Is it worth it? Or the Bobo doll?
I have a question. So I know that this is probably situationally dependent, but how do you evaluate whether or not something is worth it? Because I think that it is such a hard thing to sort of quantify, and it really, I mean, a lot of the conversations that I have at work with my peer group is asking that thing, is like, is it really worth it? Is this juice worth the squeeze? Because you have to pick and choose your battles. And I think that, we as designers always try to shoot for, what is right, or what, users are telling us is a right indicator of, what that thing might be. But it's like, then you have to process and evaluate whether or not that thing is worth it to you, your team, the organization, the company.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe you could share a vignette of a time that that you asked yourself that question? You're like, nope, I got to move on.
Yeah. Boy, how deep and personal do I get? I'll go with two. So before starting XDGO, I was working for the corporate headquarters of Best Buy up in Minnesota, and what my team was tasked with was kind of a unique problem. We were specifically tasked with trying to apply the principles and techniques of human-centered design to envision um, uh, cross-channel or multi-channel solutions, product, services, technology that our customers would need, want, and expect 3 to 5 years in the future, and try to make that tangible and inspiring enough, yet rooted in reality, so that when we went to pursue it, we weren't just chasing after dreams. And one of the things, so this is kind of on one end of the spectrum, being very formal and grand about it. One of the things that we very quickly realized was we needed to, in order to figure out what to move forward with, because we had idea generation down, and we would enlist a bunch of different people from across the organization, and we would hold these workshops and just generate a ton of ideas. But then, so like we had the divergence down, but then when it came down to converge and really prioritize what we go after, we realized really quickly early on that there was really a large cast of characters that we needed to engage in order to understand what they valued, and then try to figure out when those values either harmonized or were exactly the same or whatever. So we actually developed a method for doing what we, just for lack of a better term, prioritization workshops, where we would run these people through a bunch of different exercises. We would bring to them, here are the concepts, here are the ideas that our customers say, or based on our customer observations and all the research we've done, here are the ones that seem most desirable from a customer perspective. And so we'd start there. We'd start with customer desirability, but then we'd run them through a workshop to try to suss out which of these concepts from each of their perspectives was the most, if anybody's in agile or iterative, which is the most viable? Meaning, like when we create MVPs, let's make sure that we're creating something that's actually viable. So from a viability standpoint, what we had to do was we centered these workshops on trying to figure out from all these different people's perspectives, which of these concepts or ideas made most sense from a business value perspective, which of these ones were most scalable, and then which of these were most feasible. And so we developed some criteria and some exercises at getting at that stuff and documenting it, so that two things happened. One, we checked the box of having a clear picture on what was most important to the key players in the organization. But then we also had a sense for which order in which to proceed, because we laid all of these different priorities out on two axes. Most important to the business, most important to the customer. And so what that allowed us to do was get a clear picture of all that, but it also created a lot of buy-in and investment from the people who own decisions that would lead to the ultimate failure or success. So that's at a grand scale. Another example from my personal life is I'm sure all of us have been here, and I can't remember. I don't know who made the 12-month comment about like trying to get an organization to do something for 12 months. You actually do reach a point in tactful persistence where you do have to ask yourself the question: is the juice worth the squeeze? Am I in a situation where what I want to do professionally is in jeopardy because this organization just isn't quite ready yet? And I've been faced with those types of prioritization. So can I do it? Is it worth it? Comes into play in those situations as well. So can I do it? Sure. Is it worth it? Well, I don't know. What are my career goals? Do I think I can achieve those? And how much of a deal? How big of a deal is that? And so I have gone through that several times. I actually one example of that is I worked with a company for about 2.5 years, and I went through that kind of self-reflection and realized that basically I was working for a company who just insisted on not being successful. So I needed to go find a company that wanted to be successful.
Thank you. I have a feeling I know that company.
So
Me too. Me too, Matthew.
So I'll just that's all I'm gonna say.
No, that's good. Thank you.
Good question, Kyle.
Okay. Any other thoughts, questions, concerns? You guys up for more? Discipline, I think, is the shortest section of them all.
Before you move forward, Matthew, I just want to let everybody know, because I think most people were planning to come until 7. We are recording this, so I'll be posting it onto the Meetup event page for tonight. So you can look forward to, if you want to catch the rest of it and you need to head out, you're welcome to do so. And they'll probably be able to post the video tomorrow, so you can catch up then.
Yeah.
And before everybody jumps off, as a reminder, we are always looking for speakers. So if anyone is looking to branch out into the speaking world or have something they'd like to talk about, we're happy to do that. Just feel free to reach out to me, Michelle Brownstein, on the GNV Connect, and I will talk to you then.
Grab your what? Grab your spoon.
Cool. All right. So let's go into discipline. So I like to lead this section out with a quote by Thomas Edison. I know the history of the light bulb is controversial, and I'm a huge fan of Nikola Tesla, but Thomas Edison said something that I think is really, really apt. He said, so this is the section on discipline. He said, opportunity is missed by most people because it's dressed in overalls and it looks like work. Now that's an overly simplified outlook on things, but I think there are some really interesting principles at play there. Mostly around this concept of work, because when we talk about discipline, we're really talking about work. And discipline is kind of an interesting kind of work because it implies this notion of constancy and consistency. So discipline is like this idea of constant, consistent work. Now, even though work is really, really, really important to discipline, this is one of my favorite images. There's a difference between level of effort and actual skill that we need to acknowledge. I'm sure the level of effort that the person on the left is putting in is quite a bit of effort, but the results just aren't there. So we need effort, but we need to make sure that we're aiming our efforts in ways that will actually produce the desired result. So the first thing I like to talk about here is, when it comes to discipline, there's kind of a personal level of discipline and then kind of a group and organizational level of discipline. So generating and maintaining buy-in is one of the first and most important principles here. So to do this, it's about identifying and building on shared objectives, leaning into collaboration, creating opportunities for others to invest themselves in the process, kind of like that example that I shared with the prioritization workshops, and then documenting your decisions. This theme is going to come up quite frequently in discipline, because it's easy for groups and individuals to make decisions, but until you document them, they actually aren't real. You can't either hold yourself accountable or others accountable. Now, with all of this, you have to be aware of groupthink. And this is where I would have shown a video, but because of time, I'll just kind of talk through it. There was an experiment done called the Ash experiment, and this was an experiment in conformity. And they had they had 6 people come into a room. One of them was the actual test subject, and the others were actors. And they were shown a series of lines and asked to say which line was like the example line. And the actors were supposed to choose the wrong one to see the effect on the test participant. And more often than not, even though it was clearly wrong, they made the wrong choice because of the pressure, the kind of the underlying pressure of the group. So that's I'll just kind of go past that. If anybody wants to see it afterwards, I'm happy to show it. So the next thing is about accountability. And there's really two factors to this, holding yourself accountable. To do this, you have to actually really want to make the change. So this goes back to, can I do it? Is it worth it? Also, again, this notion of documentation, identify and document the specific things you need to do, both short and long term. And then finally, it's this notion of making things visible and keeping track of your progress. When it comes, and then involving others to help keep you honest. When it comes to holding each other accountable, this is where things get a little more sticky, and documentation actually plays a pretty big role. So first, everyone has to really want to make the change. Very similar to the last one. The next one is identify and then align on and document the specific things you need to do. This element of alignment or agreement or unity is really, really critical. I think I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons many change efforts fail is because either we haven't identified what we want to change, or we think we have, but nobody agrees on what that actually means. So generating that alignment is really, really critical. Third, we want to decide and document how to best hold one another accountable. Do we want to establish rules or an escalation process if if people aren't meeting expectations? It's important to be very clear and upfront about this in a moment when emotions aren't high, so that when emotions are high, you can actually point back to what you agreed to previously. And I've seen that work pretty smoothly. Establish regular checkpoints, make things visible, and then get really good at something called crucial conversations. There's a book called Crucial Conversations, and what it does is it supplies tools for talking when emotions are high, the stakes are high, and opinions differ drastically. I can't recommend this book enough. It's actually called Crucial Conversations, and yeah, it's really, really, really helpful. Helps you frame up how to keep things in dialogue without people going silent or getting angry. Where I'd like to land on this whole notion of discipline is these two questions also come into play here. Not just in terms of trying to change something, but in trying to make change stick. You're going to have regular opportunities to ask yourself these questions about yourself or about the people that you're trying to help change. And again, as soon as you realize which of these questions has a no as an answer, that's how you know where to aim your energies in terms of making change stick. And with that is the ABCD XD model. And I know I've asked for questions all along the way, but I wanted to explicitly call out an opportunity to have questions now.
Well, it looks like there was nothing in the chat. So everyone feel free to come off of mute and ask your questions.
Kyle. What's up, man?
Hey, I asked a question earlier. I was like, I don't think Matthew has it, but
I didn't recognize your voice. Sorry, Kyle and I go way back.
I thought for sure you knew it was him and you're trying to play it cool.
No. I hit all the faces.
It was his plant. It was his plant in the audience.
That's right.
I'm keeping an eye on you.
Please do. I desperately need it.
No, it's really great to see how this has evolved too, because like I met Matthew really early on in my career, and some of the staples are still there, but you've really sort of rounded out the whole deck. I mean, and it's not just a deck; it's a philosophy. But it's cool to see the evolution of that, because I have a personal connection to a lot of the material that's here.
Yes, you actually helped me create some of it. All right, enough of the inside conversations. Whose feathers did I ruffle? Who disagrees? What am I missing?
I just don't disagree with anything you said. I think a lot of it touches on a lot of the, like I said, the challenges that I've been facing and trying to move my project forward. So this was immensely helpful to me to kind of make the thoughts a little straighter, a little clearer in my own head, the stuff that's been rattling around. So this was great. Thank you. I did put in a link to the Crucial Conversations book. It is one that I've read as well and do recommend as a second opinion.
Yes. In these trying times when no one in positions of power is listening to each other, it's really helpful for us as the common people to kind of know how to work with each other. Any other thoughts, feedback? Happy to respond to stuff. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. You know.
Matthew, if you can maybe in the event, if you wouldn't mind putting your LinkedIn link, that might be helpful.
I can do that.
Everybody can connect there with any questions. I know we're a little over on time, so I think maybe we cut it here. Thank you again to everyone who came today. Hopefully we'll see you again next month, first Tuesday of every month, right here on Zoom. And we'll be having another great speaker, I'm sure. Otherwise, you'll probably hear me talk for an hour and nobody wants that. So,
actually, I would like that very much, Michelle. I would like to learn more.
But if anyone would like to speak, we would love to have you. Otherwise, we will see you around the bend, around the Zoom bend. So thank you guys. Everybody stay safe, wear your mask, wash your hands, stay 6 feet away from each other, and we'll see you next month.
Thanks, Matthew.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Matthew.
It was great.
Bye.
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 Bye.